Hi, my name's Joe. I'm a fourth year medical student at the University of Arizona. Today I'm going to be talking about solar energy, some of the myths and facts about solar energy, separating the perception from evidence, and why it matters for medicine and public health. The reason I chose this topic was I really don't know a lot about solar panels. So when I talk to people, I've met people on both sides of the spectrum, people who are diehard about it, who use a lot of solar panels and give back to the grid. But I also talk to a lot of other people who are telling me, this isn't worth it. It's not worth the money. You won't net even. It's actually bad for the environment. So today I wanted to be talking about the myths and the facts about solar panels, so maybe that we can both be a little more knowledgeable. All right, so introduction. Solar energy adoption is increasing globally, although a lot of misconceptions still persist. So it's really kind of important to understand what's fact and what's fiction. One of the reasons that I find this especially fascinating is in undergrad I took an econ class, and they kind of taught us about how in the late 90s, early 2000s, when clean energy and solar energy was kind of, very young, a lot of these oil companies output a lot of really bad research in the goal to kind of crash the stocks. And, when you're trying to disprove poor research, it could take up to 10 times as long, 10 times as much energy. So what these oil companies did is they put out a lot of this untrue, bad research, crashed the stocks, and then bought up all the stocks for like clean and solar energy. And they still have those stocks to this day. So, it's really important, the public perception of whether or not solar panels, clean energy, whether or not it's working or it's helpful. So one of the first, is it fact or is it fiction kind of thing, is solar worth the cost? And I chose this topic before we had the solar panel talk in our class, but the fact of the matter is that, as with anything in this modern day and age, the cost of solar panels has dropped drastically. Statistics show it's dropped around 90% since 2010. So you can only assume it's going to drop even more. The typical payback period is around 6 to 10 years. So it is a good investment given the life of a solar panel is around 25 to 30 years. You'll have it paid back, at the latest around 10 years. So you have about 20 years of making money off of it. And then after payback, the electricity from it is essentially free. So another fact, fiction, solar isn't more environmentally friendly than alternatives. I've heard some people kind of tell me this, that, the parts that go into making a solar panel, they're actually just as bad as if you were burning coal or if you're, using other alternative energy sources. The facts, solar, manufacturing does produce emissions. However, the carbon payback is only around 1 to 3 years. So if you think about the life of the solar panel being 25 to 30, the solar payback is only around 1 to 3 years before it nets even. So it really is more environmentally friendly than most alternatives. Over its life cycle, it produces around 95% less CO2 than coal. I kind of showed a little example here with a typical panel. You can see here it produces around 400 to 500 kilowatt hours per year. Over 30 years, that's around 12,000 to 15,000. So if solar emits around 45 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour in its life cycle, the total life cycle emissions are around 540 to 675. And when you compare that to coal produces around 10,000 to 12,000. So you can see that, it's around, 90 to 95% more efficient than coal as an alternative. And that's kind of like one of the biggest alternatives that it still has kind of in the market. So I'd say the next fact, fiction, the grid can't handle solar. I've heard this one a lot. We talked a little bit about it with EVs as well. What this essentially means is that, we have a grid, and the question about EVs, a lot of people are like, oh, well, everyone's going to get done with their 9 to 5. They're going to go home and they're going to plug in their cars by 6. Can the grid handle everyone plugging in an electric car at 6? And then with solar panels, the question is, if the sun's shining on a warm day, all the solar panels are getting all that light, directly on them all at once. Can the grid handle the surges, the variability of solar energy? And this is a myth. The grid can handle solar energy, and it can handle EVs from what I've seen, from what I was looking up. Because solar kind of provides more of a distributed power generation. This is kind of the one questionable thing, that it is like good and bad. The good portions are that solar is producing energy that's being used very close to the source. People who are using solar are typically using it for their own houses. But if you do add solar to what the grid is now, it will change the flow of electricity. And there are aspects of the grid that aren't modernized as well to essentially account for the flow of energy. So if you think about like the wiring, whether it's able to, account for the flow of electricity from house to house, that's not typically what it was doing in the past. It would need some modernization, which has already been being done since the 70s, essentially. It can reduce peak demand during the daytime. Yeah, so if everybody's getting, if peak demand for the grid is during the daytime, which it is, and the sun is shining during the daytime, then it would be reasonable to assume that the solar is actually kind of blunting the peak demand that the grid's having during the daytime. And then the grid challenges are primarily infrastructure modernization issues. Yes, and that's already modernization of the grid is already something that's being researched and improved upon, and that's already something that's going to need to be done. But there's been no evidence to suggest that adding solar panels or adding EVs, even though that's not what I'm talking about, wouldn't be handled well by the grid. Solar energy can be too variable. This is kind of the same tie-in with the grid, like those surges. Some people are worried that during winter months, when there isn't as much direct sunlight and the sun's out for less time, now what do? You were using solar during the nice sunny summer months, and you were getting a nice amount of energy, and you were storing that energy overnight using batteries. But can that be held up during the winter? And that's actually a pretty good argument. There's some truth to this. There are, the technology in batteries is getting better. And the batteries, what they essentially allow you to do is that they allow you to store the energy that you're getting from the sun. And then when the sun's not there, you can use that energy. There's no sort of battery, though, that would be able to store enough energy during the summer to account for the changes during the winter. So I think the numbers, I think during the winter you get around 30 to 60% reduction in the energy than you get during the summer. So that is sort of something that needs to be accounted for. But we do have a mixed grid, so you get energy from a lot of different sources. So this is an issue that would come up if it was strictly just solar in the grid. Grid already accounts for surges of variable other resources or energy sources. We talked earlier about how that during sunny times you might get a huge surge of energy from solar panels if everybody hooks a solar panel up to the grid. And honestly, what a lot of people speculate is that the grid would do perfectly fine, given that it already has surges of energy from variable other sources, and the grid handles it without issue. So the surges that you would expect from everybody hooking up a solar panel isn't something that the grid isn't already handling. And then some examples of the batteries, the lithium-ion batteries and grid-scale storage, are how people are able to store energy for, from during the day to overnight, but not necessarily between seasons or over years. Solar doesn't work as well in the winter. You just talked about this, but yeah, it really doesn't actually work as well. I was kind of looking it up, and a lot of people make arguments that in cloudier countries it can work nearly just as well. I think that seems to be the case, as solar panels, they generate electricity from light, not heat. So even in colder areas, as long as they're getting the correct amount of light on them, or the sun's out, a normal a good amount of time, and they get enough light, they'll be fine. And the cold temperatures actually increase the efficiency of the solar panels. But given that in the summers typically there is less sunlight, you get around 30 to 60% of the summer output. But cloudy countries are still successful solar power. So it's not, I mean, it is the winter, but it's not necessarily the cold. It's just whether or not you're getting the sun on the solar panel, the light. So health connections, hospital energy resiliency. There is sort of connection between solar panels and supporting our hospital systems. Hospitals kind of depend on uninterrupted power. If you're thinking about ventilators, life support, refrigerated medicines and vaccines. The solar plus battery microgrids are kind of what's being built right now. It's just adding solar onto these smaller microgrids that support hospitals in times when they're expecting outages. As we talked about, critical ventilators, imaging, medication refrigeration. I showed some examples here of when this has already come into fruition. Crescent Care Health Center, this is when Hurricane Ida went through Louisiana. They built one of these microgrids, and they were able to add on multiple hours at a time, and they suffered less outages having this, so they were essentially able to keep their medications refrigerated. And then another one, Feather River Health Center. This was during wildfires. They built the microgrid, and they're speculating that it will essentially keep these hospital systems alive during natural disaster. And then we talked about a lot kind of in-depth in our class, the health connections with air pollution. Fossil fuels pollution contributes to asthma, COPD, cardiovascular disease, and stroke. It can really be detrimental to the lungs and exacerbate a lot of underlying comorbidities. Reducing fossil fuel combustion just improves the population health in general. This has been shown time and time again. So the farther we can get away from fossil fuels, the better. And then energy poverty. If everybody had to pay less for electricity, there would be less poverty. People wouldn't be spending all their money on electricity, spending it on other things. So energy poverty can be linked to stress, mental health issues, poor chronic disease management, reduced access to heating and cooling. So in conclusion, while solar energy isn't perfect, a lot of the criticisms, a lot of them are misconceptions that are either outdated or weren't necessarily true. They were just speculation. There are still a lot of benefits to solar power, and I myself was pretty interested or pretty surprised to find out that they can last from 25 to 30 years. That's huge. People used to tell me when I was in high school that they only lasted 7 to 10 years, and it took you that long to pay it off, and it doesn't even net even. But if you're paying it off within 10 years and it lasts 30 years, I feel like that's huge. And then for healthcare professionals, cleaner energy, it can produce public health outcomes. It can keep our hospitals on the grid during natural disaster, which will be a big deal for patients who are on life support or keeping, being more efficient with those refrigerated medications.